Great. Step out of the way. Great. Thanks again. I am going to very, very quickly tee up our next panel so that they can have more time together. We are going to introduce our very good friend, Holly Woodruff Lyons, who is a legend on Capitol Hill. She was at the FAA. She worked for the Chairman Graves, and she's going to bring up and introduce an exceptional panel of congressional staffers who are the heart behind some of these efforts that Congressman Larson and Chairman Graves alluded to. So without further ado, please join me in introducing Holly, who will introduce her panelists. I think some of them may be getting mic'd up right now, so I'm going to get things started by letting you know who will be joining Holly. Our own lobbyist, Jacoby Lemos, will be joining, and we have Brian Bell, who is the Democratic Staff Director of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Julie Devine, who some of you met last night, the Staff Director for the same subcommittee. Andrew Miller, Policy Director for the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Subcommittee. And as I mentioned, our own Jacoby Lemos. So now let's welcome them to the stage again. Okay, Holly, the stage is yours. I'm going to remove this podium for you.
I'll be moderating it. Before we get going, I just want to thank Brian, Julie, and Andrew, of course, Holly, for doing the panel. It's always great to have them come and participate in the discussion. They always show up, and we're so fortunate for that. We also, of course, appreciate our ranking member, Larson, and Chairman Cummings as well. We're very fortunate to have an incredibly collaborative process. The staff are very, very detailed. They go into the weeds, and we're truly, truly very lucky to have the staff, have the lawmakers, in the community, and that's why I think you see good stuff get done and get done consistently. Thank you, guys.
That was good using up the time. I was like, what do I do? So good morning, and thank you all for being here, and thank you, Faye, for introducing them. Brian and Julie, your bosses were just here, so it'll be interesting to see how you follow up on them. And Andrew, thank you for coming. It's good to see you again this year. So I'm going to start off about DCA and the airspace around DCA, and obviously we talked about this, the tragedy that happened earlier this year involving a regional jet. And I've seen some statistics that at least as of 2024, 50% of all flights at DCA were regional. So obviously this is something that's very important to the folks here in this audience. Investigations are obviously ongoing. The NTSB has come out with some preliminary and urgent safety recommendations, a preliminary report. They had a hearing recently, and that certainly is giving some evidence where they seem to be focusing. And I think in response, I know Andrew, your boss, Chairman Cruz, has introduced the Rotor Act, the Rotorcraft Operations Transparency and Oversight Reform, Rotor Act. Can you briefly summarize what's included in that legislation?
Sure. And thanks for the question, Holly, and thank you, Ari, for having us this morning. Rotor Act really was focused on taking some of the early common sense issues that have been that emerged out of the DCA crash, the ADSB out-off loophole, the design of the airspace with mixed traffic being very close together, some of the low-hanging fruit, such as those, My boss met with Faye, met with some of the other companies who are in this room, a lot of the aviation stakeholders early in the spring to talk about air traffic modernization, say what should we do. This was, of course, before Secretary Duffy came out with his plan, and a huge priority was money, but then there were also some other things to address some safety concerns, some workforce concerns, some airspace concerns. So he gave a speech at the Aero Club in February, said just money won't solve the problem. So we started talking to stakeholders, and then we did call for solicitations and asked for ideas on the authorizing side. What we can do, and I'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about air traffic control, but one of the common themes was address the safety environment at BCA. And when he was having those conversations, he also in his head had, I know ADSB off was a problem with the helicopter, and there are going to be a million different things that went wrong with that crash, but certainly could have played a role. We'll see. But while I was thinking about that, talking to folks about ADSB off, he asked about ADSB in. The broad consensus, when we were talking to folks who were in GA or the big carriers to some of the smaller carriers, the OEMs, was that it's doable so long as everybody's doing it. Some of the things that I just touched on, ADSB off, the Rotor Act closes that loophole by taking away the ability for training missions to operate without broadcasting, expanding the route review that the FAA had initiated after the accident to apply to a larger number of airports, requiring ADSB in for all carriers in the same airspace where ADSB out is required. And then finally, we required the Army Inspector General to initiate an audit in June. More than 20 senators sent a letter led by Senators Cruz and Cantwell to the Army Inspector General, to the DOT Inspector General. DOT started the audit, but the Army hasn't yet. So we're interested in transparency and accountability for all the operators in the airspace. So figuring out what systemic failures that are playing a role in the accident are important to members of the committee. I think the Rotor Act, we dropped it right before we left for August recess, the Tuesday before. I called a bunch of other organizations, said, here's this bill. You might hate it, but we're going to drop it anyway, and then we'll talk about it in August and September and get it to a good place. And we had a lot of great feedback, and we're still making plans to move forward, but the committee is committed, Chairman Cruz is committed to moving that bill forward. It seems like the reception has been very positive from industry. We drafted it to be implementable, to be a feasible timeline, to provide for additional flexibility if needed. Because it's a big thing, mandating ADSB in. It's really challenging, depending on the kind of aircraft, depending on the age of the aircraft. It's a significant modification, and we're sensitive to that. But I think Chairman Cruz co-sponsors the bill. Randy Cantwell introduced a Chairman bill that does a similar thing for commercial aircraft, but there's consensus, bipartisan, that it's a step in the right direction. At least, certainly it's a safety improvement, but also once there's widespread adoption, you'll have the efficiency gains as well.
That's it. It's interesting. In 2012, in our reauth, we had an ADSB in mandate, and in 2018, because FAA wasn't moving on it, we eliminated that mandate. So it's certainly something that's been discussed for a very long time. So Julie and Brian, I'm curious, do Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson have any plans to do anything similar in the House?
Yeah, so Chairman Graves has for a very long time held a philosophy that we should not legislate on a crash until the NTSB has finalized the investigation. The Rotor Act has definitely sparked some important conversations I think that need to be had. And so from our perspective, I think the chairman holds true to his general philosophy that particularly on legislating on any type of probable cause of a crash indefinitely is something he doesn't want to do until the NTSB finalizes their recommendations in the report. So At this time, we're not currently planning on doing anything similar. Once the report comes out, I'm sure the conversation will be sparked. But for now, we're holding short on that. But obviously, ATC has come up and been a very important part of the conversation that we'd be remiss if that was not sparked from the tragedy that happened at TCA.
Yeah, no, I think Mike Paul's has a similar perspective. He was very much supportive of everything that was done in the wake of the accident. The review of other airports that hold similar risks in terms of mixed traffic, elimination of that route that was used, limited ability to use visual separation in the area, the ESP in requirements, or health requirement. And my boss has also sent a letter to FAA asking for even additional changes to increase safety at the airport. So my boss is very much in favor of the prospect that more needs to be done. But I think my boss holds a similar view that the Chairman Graves, wait for the investigation to be completed, see what the recommendations are, and then see what can move. If you look back at other fatal accidents that have occurred and the congressional response to that, it's those bills that eventually passed into law, they were always based, at least in part, on recommendations of the final report, and they were bipartisan. So I think for that to happen, the final report needs to come out, and I think that gives momentum for anything that Congress is going to do in response to the accident.
Fair enough. Let's dig in a little bit deeper, though, on ADSBN and mandating that. Obviously, regional jets have a little unique situations. And so, Drew, can you talk a little bit about the feedback that RAA did submit to Chairman Cruz's bill?
Yeah, happy to. So I think first and foremost, we support the congressional efforts to respond to the tragic accident at DCA. And ultimately, when that happens and how that happens is out of our control, right? It's their prerogative how they, the timing and how they respond, be it when consensus recommendations, when they think there's consensus recommendations that can address key topics or after the ADSB report. So I think the ADSBN, our priority is making sure that the technology works, that it can be delivered, and that it's effective, right? I think to the point you alluded to, Holly, ADSBN technology is not available on the regional aircraft. It's still in the process of being developed. It's years away. And after it's been certified, it has to be produced, it has to be installed, and all these things take time. And then when you add into a rulemaking process into that, that frankly slows down the process because nothing's going to be fully developed until manufacturers are aware of what specs they have to meet. So it's a complicated process. And on top of it, there's the training that has to go in to make sure it's used effectively with our pilots, with the controllers. It needs to be universal so that everybody has situational awareness benefits. And then, additionally, I think the key attribute that is being looked at now is the additional situational awareness, right, to avoid what happened at DCA. But for the longest time, the key benefit associated with ADSBN was better air traffic optimization. Being able to get more aircraft consistently into airports, having standardized distances, and we certainly support those benefits as well. And we want to see them delivered concurrently with the benefit of situational awareness too. So, that is where we're coming from with our feedback. We don't want to the point you made, It was mandated in the 2012 reauthorization, and then it was pulled back in 2018 because of lack of progress. We don't want to be a similar spot where it's lack of progress and everybody's wondering why. So to everybody, again, to the credit of everybody on the stage, to the credit of their bosses, there's always a robust feedback loop. Ideas are put out, they're asked for feedback, we have a dialogue. We have a dialogue with as stakeholders within the stakeholder community as well, and we try to get to a place to make it work. Then they can go forward with their bosses and make the best decision, and the decision that has consensus on it. But it's not for lack of them coming back and having a dialogue and being informed. So.
And judging by the nods as you were, raising some of the unique issues.
No, they're all it's not just like they're absolutely aware. I mean, it's just the three of them in GG2 are just, they're incredibly well versed, they're knowledgeable, they're aware. I mean, more so than, I am, so that they're very good at what they do.
We used to call them the A-team when I was there. So having heard what you had to say, is that lame now? I don't know.
A-team now is
No, it still is, okay. So having heard Drew reviewing kind of the concerns and issues that are unique to this part of the industry, do you anticipate that you guys will be open to working with and addressing and allowing maybe additional time to resolve these types of unique concerns?
Yeah. The feedback has been very helpful from Drew, from some of the larger carriers, from the manufacturers, who are you're going to have to, as Drew mentioned, all great points. As Drew mentioned, the manufacturers are going to have to wait for performance standards, all the things that will come out of rulemaking. It's all interconnected. And when we drafted and Chairman Cruz introduced the Rotor Act, we had a couple different components. It was required for newly manufactured aircraft at a certain date, and then it was required for everybody else. And we did mess up a little bit in the timing in the middle. We will fix it. And then we have the bill gives the FAA the authority, because it's a challenging requirement. It's a big ask. And there are a lot of things that could hold up the process. Give the FAA administrator the discretion to extend the timeline for certain aircraft, for example, for some regional aircraft, that the requirement may be most challenging for those kinds of aircraft because of the age, because the avionics, the cockpit design, there are a lot of things that may need to change. And we try to be sensitive to that and give the FAA some discretion to push out the timeline past the compliance date for specific aircraft if he deems appropriate. He just has to let us know, he or she, and I don't have the timeline, I can't remember. It's going to be referred, but they just have to let Congress know, and they have that authority. He has that discretion because we want to be sensitive to the difficulties. And then there's a low cost of compliance for the GA aircraft. We talked to General 80% of GA pilots use some form of ADS-B today. Most of them just aren't certified by the FAA. We may have a portable transponder connected to your iPad. You're getting some situational awareness, you're getting weather information, but that technically, some of those systems aren't certified, so wouldn't technically meet the requirement. And so for the purposes of meeting the requirement, this will count, because we're faced with if a GA pilot has to put in a fully certified ADS-B system, take out the ADS-B out system that we did a rebate program for. It's close to $10,000. Require a portable transponder and an iPad, so they're still getting the information. It's less than $1,000. So that trade-off, in order to get to widespread adoption, we thought was worth it. So we did all those things to try to show we're being sensitive to the challenge and certainly open to feedback. And I think the Rotor Act is introduced when we move forward with it. We'll have some additional changes based on the good feedback that we have gotten.
So broader context here, and then you three probably can't comment, but I think Holly can because she's not there anymore. There's a timeline dynamic here. Like, as stakeholders, we want as much time as possible. We want the bill to reflect the operational and production and manufacturing realities of getting a technology like this installed and getting the benefits. Their timeline considerations are a little bit different, right? Because they know that FAA routinely misses their deadlines. Pilot database that came out of the Coleman accident years and years ago, and which is one of the most consensus-based recommendations on what to prevent that accident, was only delivered a couple of years ago. Secondary barriers, right? On new build, nothing. I mean, it's backlog. So there are so many examples of FAA missing deadlines for whatever reason. So it is absolutely in their boss's prerogative to make that timeline as much as possible. It's just there's a competing perspective dynamic, and that's just part of the policy making process. When you have something you say about like.
But deadlines don't matter?
Yeah, deadlines don't matter. They can't say, but like deadlines don't matter, right?
So that's part of the process here that is very like aware for us, but maybe not for people who are out, working in the space every single day.
I think the key here is Andrew and his boss appreciate that the technology is advancing and that things are changing and that installing and certifying and training is complicated. And so that conversation has started, and that's I think the important thing. And that's a lot of times what happens with legislation. You introduce it, it starts the conversation, and it evolves as you go through that process. And at some point, the bill will be negotiated with the House, and they'll have their input. And you heard from the two leaders of that committee, and they're also on armed services, which I think is fascinating because they can call the Army to task through that process too. So I think it's all positive in that everyone recognizes there are so many things that have to be addressed, and they're trying to address them and do it in a thoughtful way. So we'll switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about ATC modernization. This has been a discussion a lot. The 12.5, which honestly is a lot of money from my perspective, my time on the Hill, that much money going into F&E at FAA, it's incredible. And everyone talks about it being a down payment, but we're starting to hear things from the Hill about when is the next tranche coming, and the total amount of money that the administration is saying is going to be needed. And recently the Secretary indicating that they wouldn't be asking for any more money this year. So I was just curious, Drew, are you guys supportive of the total amount that, not the 12.5, but the total amount that has been out there discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're part of the Modern Skies Coalition. We want, as much as it takes to get the job done and to, help prevent, this modernization effort from looking like the next gen process. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we're supportive of doing what it takes to get, permitting reform through that's appropriate so these projects can be delivered efficiently and can have the ROI that everybody hopes they have. But how they do it and the timeline for it is up to these folks and their bosses. So we'll support however we can.
So to the committee staff, I'm just curious how the administration's statements regarding the need for significant additional funding are being received up on the Hill by the committees, by your bosses.
From Chairman Graves' perspective, he's very supportive of the additional $19 billion. We really took the lead in getting reconciliation through the $12.5 billion in reconciliation. Not ideal. Chairman Graves loves to do everything bipartisan. That's his baseline. Obviously, reconciliation is a partisan practice, but we just saw it as the immediate opportunity to really get that infusion of cash to the ATC system. And Chairman Graves, wants to try and help Secretary Duffy and the administration find the extra $19 billion that they need. The vehicle, I think, is the biggest question mark here. Is there going to be reconciliation round 2? Is there going to be emergency supplemental? I think that's no one, I don't think, really knows what vehicle could be. Chairman Graves he's committed to trying to find a way and a path forward. But I think, we're also mindful of the fact that $12.5 billion is a lot of money, particularly for a lot of fiscal conservatives who have lived through next gen and saw how much money was wasted there. And so I think from a lot of the perspective of our conference, we have to be mindful of making sure that we hold the FAA accountable in the $12.5 billion, hopefully seeing some movement on their end with the money, some positive movement, some positive progress. I think before some folks in our conference would be willing to shell out another $19 billion, but from the chairman's perspective, he's all in, he wants to help.
Yeah, I think my boss mentioned, when he was up here, he wants to make sure that this process is successful and that the administration is successful in modernizing the system and making it safer. So, if they need additional, $19 billion, I think he's happy to consider it. I do think, $12.5 billion is a lot of money, particularly in our space. I mean, to raise AIP from 3.35 to $4 billion a year took a lot, and that wasn't even $1 billion a year. So, we're talking about $12.5 billion. It's a lot of money, and I think, Congress is going to want to see, what's being done with that. I understand it's very early in the process, but, we would like more details about how that's going to be spent, where it's going, just making sure that it's being spent, quickly, but effectively and transparently. So I think there needs to be a little bit of progress made on that front, and so Congress can trust that whatever additional funding is going to be used to upgrade the system is going to be spent in a manner that's respectful of U.S. taxpayers.
All good points from Brian and Julie. I think from our perspective, from the perspective of Senate Republicans, $12.5 billion is a lot. And as Chairman Graves just mentioned, as Drew just mentioned, as Julie and Brian just mentioned, the FAA historically has been bad at doing big things, Next Gen being example number one. So from the perspective of Senate Republicans, we were willing to provide $12.5 billion for some of the activities that were most urgently needed. I mean, Newark was melting down over the summer, so it was obvious that some investments for fiber were needed quickly. Other things like radar, those are all known commodities. You're not redesigning anything. We're happy to provide the resources to improve those, replace all the radar fleet across the country, because we felt, I think Chairman Cruz felt, that by providing the down payment for the urgently needed activities so that the NAS could continue to operate, it's twofold. You're providing the resources needed for the NAS, but then you're also giving the FAA the opportunity to show that they can move in an agile manner, they can think creatively, they can push back against the middle mud and do things quickly. If they have a 3.5, 4-year timeline, you need to be able to do things quickly. So in the package that came out of the Senate, I think the members were saying, here's the down payment, show me you can do it, show me you can build one new en route center, and then if you want to build some more, we can discuss that. But I think this was, and we were doing that at the same time that Administrator Bedford was being confirmed. So multiple conversations that were all related, and he was able to say, I know Secretary Duffy has come out with this plan. If I'm confirmed, it's going to be my responsibility to implement it. And he's got a CEO mindset. Obviously, you guys all know him well. He, throughout his confirmation process, and since he's gotten into office, has demonstrated that his fresh perspective is unique and novel to the bureaucracy. But we knew doing all those things at the same time was helpful because he was saying, I'm going to ask, I'm going to question assumptions, And then, assuming that he's successful in making progress quickly and laying fiber and replacing radars and all the other things that we're in the bill, we'd be happy to talk about more.
I appreciate that. Switching gears again. We are again looking at a possible shutdown of the federal government. Pundits believe the odds of the shutdown are growing by the day. There's a lot of public posturing going on, which is not uncommon. But I guess just across the panel, if anybody wants to comment, do you have any thoughts on the threat of a shutdown on October 1st and the need for a CR that you could share or would like to share?
We hope it doesn't happen.
You hope there's no shutdown.
We hope there's no shutdown.
Gosh, I give it I'd probably say it's like greater than 50% chance we'll shut down, but at the same time, like you said, Holly, there's a lot of posturing going on. This is just a stare down contest. Shutdown threats always are. You will have both sides digging in and holding strong until the very last minute, and then typically something comes together at the last minute. We have had quite a few shutdowns over the last decade or so, but right now, to be honest, a week out, it's kind of too early to tell exactly what's going to happen. But we're in the world's largest staring contest right now, and it will all probably resolve around 10 p.m. on September 30th. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, we've been making bets in my office for 2 weeks. We've got a post-it note where everybody's guessed their dates. I don't know if I'm crazy, but I don't think there's going to be a shutdown. I think they'll figure something out. From an aviation perspective, shutdowns are very disruptive. The shutdown usually stops training at the academy, and then they'll show us 10 years later, 10-day shutdown, this is why. So we hope that there's not one. And I think I agree with what Julie just said. There's a lot of posturing. I don't think there's going to be one. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, in 2019, the 34-day shutdown during Trump's first administration, it was air traffic controllers that brought an end to that. They were tired of coming in and working and not being paid, and they started calling in sick, and that started disrupting flights. And guess who flies a lot? Members of Congress. And next thing you know, everybody resolved it very quickly. Hopefully that won't be what happens this time. I always say never say never. Congress sometimes, they posture right up until the crisis is upon us. If it's over a weekend, we've had some that over a weekend, they're just not that disruptive, or even overnight. It's interesting. There seems to be some, maybe Brian has accepted some positive thoughts there on whether we will have one or not. Drew, in the past with government shutdowns, what's been the impact to the regional airline industry specifically?
The longer we take it, so I think first and foremost, the priority is to continue to ensure the safety of the system, right? Safety isn't compromised in the event of a shutdown. For us, it's definitely a business impediment. Aircraft can't get certified, pilots can't get certified, so the business functions of the FAA stop. And so the longer it goes on, the more expensive it gets, the more backlog you have, and then when everything restarts, you're behind the ball. I think the other part of this is we have a safe aviation system because it's a collaborative effort that involves multiple stakeholders. And that includes TSA agents, right? The shutdown's demoralizing for them, air traffic controllers, as you alluded to, FAA employees, and so it's bad all the way. Controllers, it's just bad all the way. It's bad all the way around. It should be avoided if we can, but politics are bigger than just us, of course.
All right, so FAA reauthorization. I'm going to ask each of you to grade, and I think the Deputy Secretary, Administrator is gone, but I'm going to ask each of you to grade how you believe, and this is your personal opinion, I know you're not representing your bosses in this, A, B, C, or D, how FAA has implemented the FAA reauthorization of 2024. And we can start with Andrew this time.
I give them an
An A?
Yeah, I think that they've done very well. For communication with the FAA has been great since we got it enacted, since it was enacted. I think that from what I've heard, I had a conversation with somebody at the FAA last year, and they were talking about implementation. He said, in the past, every line of business got their mandates and the studies that they had to do and everything else, and they just sort of siloed in the lines of business and took their directives and did them. And sometimes it was entirely counter to what Congress was saying. I'm sure you can think of a couple of examples. But the way that it was explained to me was there's more dialogue between the front office of the FAA, government affairs, the different lines of business, every line of business. We had a Zoom shortly after it was enacted and said, okay, like these folks from each line of business are the FAA leads. So it felt like they were bird dogging the different requirements that were assigned to their lines of business in a more fulsome way, and then the dialogue between Congress and the FAA has been good.
I'd give them a B+, and only because they're late on a couple things, EQP being one of them, but I'm glad to hear that the deputy administrator said that advisory circular is going to be coming out soon on that. But like I echo everything that Andrew said, they have been very communicative with us in getting briefings set and answering our questions. I feel like they've mostly been implementing things, as Congress intended. There are a couple of little small things here and there that I've had some disagreements with them on in terms of what, or some additional questions, that I've voiced with them. But, the Chairman Grace in particular is very pleased with the way that they've been implementing the general aviation title. That was his kind of pride of the FAA Ralph bill. He is a general aviation pilot. And so they have done a very good job, I think, in implementing those GA title provisions and implementing them on time. But they are late on a couple things. To give them credit, though, it's a big bill. I mean, it's the biggest FAA reauthorization act in history, almost double, I think, the size of the last one. And so they do have their work cut out for them, and I think they did a good job planning for that, knowing that that was coming down the line. But B+, that's where I'm at.
So look at it a little bit differently. If we're talking about timing and transparency, I do agree that they have been much more transparent starting last year up until now, much more transparent in terms of where they're at and giving us status updates, and even in terms of timely implementing the provisions in the bill. You have to grade on a curve, because if you were to actually grade based on 10% of the provisions or 20% of the provisions were done, if you were in school, they would have failed grade. But if you were based on the curve and based off of previous FAA bills, I do agree. I think they've done a pretty good job of trying to be more timely than they have in the past and being more communicative. I think the issue that my boss would have is that some of the executive orders and administrative actions that have been prioritized are directly conflicting with some of the provisions that were included in the FAA reauthorization bill. My boss talked about the workforce grants. We're talking about FY25 NOFO being revised because it needs to be in line with administrative priorities, even though it's pretty straightforward in terms of how Congress wanted that to be implemented. That's not the only example. There are a couple of examples of programs that were included in the bill that aren't being implemented, and we suspect may not be implemented because they're not in line with the administration's priorities. So we have a lot of concerns over how that's going to go. We're going to give them time because they haven't, there's still time to go in terms of implementing the bill and actually seeing what they come up with in terms of how these provisions are going to reflect the administrative priorities. But just seeing that be delayed some provisions be delayed this long based off of whether it's in line with the priorities or not, the administrative priorities or not, are concerning. But I do agree in terms of timing, in terms of transparency, they've done a relatively good job.
That's good. That's good to hear. I was actually surprised. Those are higher grades than I thought you would give them.
You have years of experience behind you.
I'm a little jaded, I agree. Okay, so I do want to talk quickly about EQP, and then we'll finish up with kind of what's ahead, looking ahead. So obviously, EQP is super important to the folks here. There is a deadline of not later than November 15, 2024. So we're almost a year past that deadline. So I'm just curious if you guys can talk a little bit about this particular provision and what type of oversight the committees have done and plan to do with regard to pilot training.
Yeah, so, the whole conversation surrounding pilot training, was one of those tougher conversations that we had throughout REOF. Obviously Chairman Graves was one of his number one priorities was getting additional simulator time to count towards 1,500-hour goal. He's held that belief for a very long time. And we had it in our base bill, and unfortunately it was stripped via amendment on the House floor when we were considering it. So EQP was kind of the end-all be-all agreement of that general philosophical conversation that we were having. And we do think that it's an important provision to help with the pilot shortage. It helps some of those airlines get a better pipeline of pilots. We've engaged with FAA formally and informally on it, simply because of the issue of them being significantly late on the provision. I will be curious to see how the administration, views the provision, how they're going to structure the advisory circular. I think a lot of the conversation will be sparked once that comes out, so we can kind of see exactly how it's going to get implemented. Because it's important, we want to make sure that we have a healthy pilot pipeline, and part of that is looking at pilot training. So we'll see.
And we've been given a warning, we're going to be pulled off stage, but I just very quickly, if you guys want to comment about plans for the next year and how the midterms will impact, and 30 seconds or less.
I think ATC is kind of in front of us right now, and we're working, my boss is working with Chairman Graves, and me and Julie are working together to try to figure something out on that. A number of issues, and we're getting feedback from industry, including RAA, some really good ideas in terms of what to include. Heading into next year, the final report for the DCA crash is going to come out, so definitely take a look at that and consider potential legislation and continuing just implementation of the FAA bill overall. So those are kind of the immediate things that I see in front of us, but I'm sure I'm missing other things.
Sorry, as Brian said, ATC is really kind of the top of the conversation right now. We've been doing stakeholder solicitations on policy ideas because, yes, we've given all this money, but I think we need to do more so that Congress can hold the FAA accountable, and whoever the prime integrator is chosen, how to hold them accountable and how they work together. So we've been, thinking about various things that we can do in that front. And so ATC is the biggest one, but overall with the committee, surface is really the biggest priority, I think, for the committee. That is a reauthorization bill, and so our highways team is hard at work doing that. And I know the chairman has a lot of goals for that. ATC, Chairman Nels has been doing an ATC working group, talking to various stakeholders about, their views and have a casual conversation about what really needs to be done to improve the system. To his credit, he's really been involved and been at the forefront of this conversation. That's kind of what we have.
Real quick, in a little set of commerce aviation space, obviously Rotor Act is the top priority for the chairman, and then ATC is something that we're also working on. I think in addition to holding the FAA accountable and making sure that the modernization project is transparent, we also want to make sure that they have the tools that they need, they being the FAA, to be successful. It's been in the press a lot in the last week or so that there may be some permitting changes, but also are there procurement changes? Is there more that can be done on the workforce side for controllers? There's a lot that we're looking at, so we'll work on that for the rest of the year. And then assuming we get those done, which is a big assumption, I think we'd like to look at TSA reauthorized once since it was established over 20 years ago. So I think that we'd probably look at that next. And then it's crazy to think about, but the midterms, of course, they'll set the balance of power in Washington, but that'll also create the dynamic that we work within the next reauth bill, which is kind of scary to think about. So
I don't want to think about it.
yeah.
Well, thank you all. You guys are the ones that do the hard work, and super appreciate you taking the time to come over and join us today. Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you, Holly. And while they're having that group photo, I just want to say, next up we have a break in the hall. As always, I encourage you to go and have some coffee, but see our supply company partners. And then please come back here just after 11 when we'll start our next panel, The Future of Safety. Thank you.